so far?
Not him.
Not him because you chose not to? Okay, fair enough. How many people have joined the challenge? Oh, so about 50% or more of the room. And how is it going so far? It's only been like a week, right? Yeah. Is it easy, hard? Have you made any changes in order to do better?
Not yet, but slowly.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Just because you're on this challenge, have you made any changes to your lifestyle because of it? You have. What have you done?
Oh, you want me to share my secrets?
If you want.
No, I'm eating a lot more vegetables.
More vegetables. Okay. Any others? Okay. Working out. Okay.
Drinking more
More
water.
gym time.
Less carbs.
Less carbs. More water.
No alcohol.
No alcohol. That's a good one. Just got food. Other lifestyle changes? Excellent. So none of you mentioned the one thing that we're going to focus on today, although tangentially everything that you said will relate back to this core concept. But what we are going to focus on today is a little bit of a different idea on how to lose body fat based on the science behind how we gain body fat. So as you know, and as many of you have already heard from me, I always like to focus a bit on the scientific aspect of anything that's related to health and fitness. So we'll go through a little bit of that today, but of course at the end we'll hopefully walk away with some practical tips as to how we can lose body fat. So let's start with some definitions. What is body fat? You're just pointing at your belly, is that it? It's just whatever is sitting here.
I guess stored energy reserves.
Stored energy reserves, okay. Same thing. Very good. So fat, its scientific term, or its fancy name, I guess, is adipose tissue. And we have adipose tissue in a variety of different places in our bodies. And it's not all bad. So I know that oftentimes when we hear the name fat, we think it's negative and it's something that's bad, but it's not always negative. In fact, it stores energy for many of us. So any specific areas in the body where there's additional fat is actually useful. Not just for storing energy, but also for insulation. Do you know what it is? Not insulating us against cold, per se, but other forms of insulation. Do you know where in the body we have fat that is actually critical to our health?
Nerves.
Where? Nerves. Where around nerves?
It's the insulation layer around the nerve.
Very good. Very good. So in our nerves, in the central nervous system, our brain and spinal cord, the nerves that are running across all the different parts of the nervous system are insulated, just like the wires, the wires of electricity. It's, in fact, the nerves in the body are identical to the wires of electricity. And they need to have insulation around them. Without insulation, they don't conduct electricity. And so this is and that insulation, by the way, is pure fat. It's called myelin, but it's pure fat. So this is one place where you really want it. In fact, many of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease are caused by loss of these myelin sheets, or these fat insulations around the neurons. So it's important to have it. It's not that we uniformly want to get rid of fat everywhere in the body. It also obviously serves as a cushion at times, and that is also important. In certain parts of the body, it's important to protect the bones by cushioning with fat. There's a reason, for instance, why around our glutes we have both muscle and fatty tissue. But not all fat is created equal. So what's the difference between the good fat and the bad fat? We just talked about fat that we use for storing energy, parts of our, and also fat that we use for insulation. So the fat that we use for insulation is considered essential fat, and the other fat is the storage fat. But even with storage fat, it's not all bad. We have parts of storage fat that are called subcutaneous fat, and does anyone know what the other side is?
What's that?
What's the other side? Visceral fat. Yeah. So what's the difference between these two?
Subcutaneous is under the skin, right?
Good.
And visceral is around the organs.
Perfect.
What about the brown adipose?
So those are all considered storage fat, and you can have brown adipose versus white adipose tissue that is good or bad. So it depends where fat is. If the fat is subcutaneous versus visceral, it will have a very different effect on the body. So just from a color scheme, for those of you who aren't colorblind, of course, which one of these is considered bad fat? Visceral. And why?
Like to
It
diabetes.
literally wraps around our organs. So here's a cartoon diagram of it. Subcutaneous fat is this right here. If this is the layer of skin, and imagine this is your abdominals, like muscle tissue, subcutaneous fat is sitting right under your skin. So that is what we see here and here. But this visceral fat is all around the organ. And typically visceral fat we see a lot right here. So in fact, when you were pointing at the belly, this is really it. This is the fat we're trying to get rid of. And you can normally tell what visceral fat is like, even around your belly, because if you hold on to it, it's pretty tight. It doesn't really move around. Subcutaneous fat, you can move it around. But visceral fat is all around the organs, and this kind of fat is the one that we're trying to get rid of. This means that, for instance, when you have big hips, right, if you have fat around your hips, is that considered a bad thing necessarily? No. Because guess what? There are no actual internal organs around your hips. Your internal organs are all here. So this is the fat that's really affecting us the most, not so much this. Which is also why, if you have noticed most recently in the field of weight loss, one of the measurements that we're starting to, I hope, more and more get away from, and I think scientists started this idea, and hopefully the health field is going to jump on the bandwagon soon, is BMI. What does BMI tell you? What's that? What does it tell you? What information does it give us?
Body mass index.
Body mass index, which is an index that's dependent on your weight, and your weight does not necessarily show you how your fat is distributed. When in reality, studies have over and over again shown that it's the distribution of that fat, it's the distribution of that weight that causes cardiovascular problems, that causes heart problems. People who have visceral fat are more likely to suffer from cardiovascular diseases as opposed to people who have subcutaneous fat. So we're getting away from BMIs and instead turning to what? To measure health and fitness. Does anyone know what the most recent measurements are, other than body fat percentages, which obviously you can do in a variety of ways? There's a very convenient one. It's not the scale, it's not BMI, it's something you can do every single day by yourself.
Waistline.
Height to weight.
What is it?
Height to weight ratio.
Not height to weight,
Waistline.
waist to hip. Waist to hip ratio. So why? Because if your waist is small, you don't have a lot of visceral fat, right? So you're measuring how much visceral fat you're holding as opposed to the amount of fat that's in your hips, which is all subcutaneous. No big deal. That pear shape, all good. It's the apple that we don't want, right? We don't want the fat that's here. We don't want the muffin tops, yeah.
Does that work the same for men's?
Yep, both the same. Visceral fat is the same belly, yeah, it's just, the difference between how it perhaps manifests itself, but we typically store the bad fats in our belly. So the best way for you to determine how healthy you are, I'm not talking about how you look or, people have different definitions of what's considered beauty perhaps, or the standard of fitness. But if you're shooting for health, waist to hip ratio is by far your best indicator. Ditch the scale. it's not indicative of any information. It doesn't tell you, it gives you your weight, but it doesn't tell you how that fat is distributed. And of course, certain types of body fat measurements are also fantastic, but those are also, some of them are very inaccurate. They have high levels of error. So one of the easiest and most convenient, accessible means of measuring fat is waist to hip ratio. And you can go and measure that for yourself on a daily basis in reality. And this is why visceral fat is bad, is because it causes inflammation. And this has been shown over and over again in studies where visceral fat has been associated with an increase in the release of what we call reactive oxygen species. These are those free radicals that I'm sure everybody has heard of at some point or another. Free radicals increase general inflammation in the body. And visceral fat increases inflammation. When inflammation goes up, you have cell death. So the cells in those internal organs slowly begin to degenerate. And this is what over time leads to many of the different cardiovascular diseases that we know of. And that's why ultimately the mechanism for why it's so unhealthy to have belly fat or fat stored around the abdominals is because of that. So how do we make it? How is it that certain fats end up in our belly, and what can we, this is what's going to hopefully help us to figure out how to get away from this kind of fat. So here's the mechanism. When we eat food, so what you're doing right now, and it doesn't matter what food it is, I'm talking about any kind of food, healthy, unhealthy, whatever it is, this is the mechanism. As a result of eating food, what are you increasing in your blood? Sugars, right, or glucose levels. And that's because there's insulin that's produced. Insulin is, what is insulin? It's a hormone. It's released into the bloodstream that detects glucose levels. So as soon as you eat, there's all this sugar in your blood. Insulin realizes, okay, sugar levels are high. I need to do something about that because high levels of glucose can put you into prophylactic shock. You can go into a coma as a result of it. So as soon as insulin or glucose levels go up, insulin gets produced, and insulin then breaks down this food into sugars that your cells can uptake. And your cells will use this sugar for energy. I'll show you a diagram of this in a second, which will make things easier to understand. So your cells can use this sugar for energy if they need it. So if you're hungry, if you haven't had food for a while, if you've been consuming all the stored energy in your body, this is a time for your body to use the food that you're eating. But it can also build up if it's unnecessary. So if I'm not hungry and I'm just eating because it's fun to eat, it's yummy, insulin levels are going to go up because I have a lot of sugar in my body, in my bloodstream, but I don't even need that sugar. And again, in this diagram that I'm about to show you, all of this will make even more sense. But what I want you to recognize is that this high insulin level is precisely why we make fat. So when insulin is high, that means there's too much sugar in the body. And when there's too much sugar in the body, that means the body is going to store all of that as this visceral extra fat that it doesn't need. And what's worse, in addition to that, actually let me go over this first and then I'll come to what's worse beyond that. So here's a diagram of how insulin works. Imagine this is a cell in your body. Every cell needs glucose in order to survive. Every cell has what's called an insulin receptor on it, which is where insulin will bind. So insulin and its receptor are like a lock and key system. So if you have the key, then insulin, which is this receptor, then insulin will bind. So right now, when there's no insulin, you can see this channel that allows glucose to enter the cell is closed. So no glucose can go inside the cell. This is when there is no need for any glucose. You have enough, your cells are doing fine, they're surviving, they feel no need for additional amounts of glucose to come in. But let's say now there's more glucose in the body. You just had food, right? You just ate. So glucose levels in your bloodstream, which is out here, increase. When glucose levels go up, now insulin is produced. Insulin binds into this receptor or into its key, and glucose begins to enter the cells. So you essentially take the sugar that's sitting in your bloodstream and you send it into the cell where it can be used for energy, which is exactly the way that the body should be operating. What you don't want is excess amounts of insulin and glucose hanging out in your bloodstream. When we overeat or when we eat the wrong types of food, which we'll get to in a second, these insulin levels and glucose levels in the bloodstream stay high, and they don't get necessarily uptaken by the cell. When insulin stays high, all of that glucose ends up going to fat storage, and it goes into visceral fat storage, not the good kind of fat. What's worse, and this was what I was going to tell you a second ago, what's worse is that as blood sugar levels are high, like we said, production of insulin goes up, which means sugar metabolism is constantly going up because you have a lot of sugar in your blood and the body wants to get rid of it. It doesn't want to maintain all of this sugar. The problem is, while sugar is being metabolized and insulin is high, fat metabolism goes down. Because the body thinks that the reason why you're taking up so much glucose is because you need it. So why would it metabolize your fat? It would metabolize your fat if it was in starvation mode. If it felt like there's a need for it to, and by starvation I don't mean like anorexia, I mean like, your body just needs food, it needs an energy source. But if it doesn't feel the need to give you an additional energy source, it's going to stop fat metabolism altogether. And this is why one of the most compelling ways, in my at least scientific opinion, for reducing body weight is to regulate insulin levels. When you regulate insulin levels, you allow fat metabolism to continue and your blood sugar levels stay maintained and normal. And what's more, and I hope that after walking away from here today and learning how to regulate your insulin levels, you'll see this, your cravings reduce. So you don't get strange, weird cravings for foods that perhaps we normally do. Like all of a sudden we'll want to eat a cake. A whole cake. This is most of the times because the insulin levels are a little out of whack. And this all comes together because of the types of food that we eat. So we'll cover all of that together today. So my contention to you today, everything that we're gonna focus on is about insulin. So all the things that you guys set aside for maintaining lower body fat percentages, this, I think, is the core of it. And if we can learn to do this correctly, then the foods that you're eating are going to ensure that your fat metabolism is happening constantly, and you don't have high levels of insulin at all times. So how do we regulate insulin levels? Does anyone know? Does anyone know how, if you know anyone who's diabetic, you may know. This is a very similar diet to diabetic patients, actually.
Is it like eating small meals?
Don't they count carbs?
That could have an effect, but it's not the core of it. Counting carbs, why though?
Because the carbs turns into sugar.
Yeah.
Carbs turn into sugar, okay, so what's the key component that diabetics are concerned? Glycemic index. Has anyone heard of glycemic index?
Yeah.
A few people, okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today, is glycemic index. So the idea for insulin regulation at the first level is to reduce refined carbs, processed sugars, refined carbs, and that's predominantly because of the amount of sugar, glycemic load, that these kinds of foods carry. So what is that? GI is basically an arbitrary number that tells you how fast your sugar levels are changing. So the higher the GI of the food that you're eating, the more of a cyclical pattern you're going to have with your insulin levels. and you're gonna spike your sugar levels super high, which is gonna spike insulin super high, and you're gonna stay there for a long time. It's gonna take some time for those blood sugar levels to come back down to normal, which is a problem. So we wanna focus on this glycemic index. Now, do you know if GI is written on the back of any food products that you buy at the grocery store? No. What are the things that you find on the nutrition charts?
Carbs, sugar, sodium.
Carbs, sodium. What's at the top?
Calories.
And then fats. We have naturally become a nation afraid of fats. We think that it's fats that are making us fat. We have had this backwards all these decades. And just slowly we're starting to recognize it's not the fats, it's the sugars that are making us fat. It's the carbs that are making us fat. And so in reality, if we wanted to redesign the entire nutrition chart, really the focus needs to be at the top on glycemic index. Sadly, that's not the case right now. So when as you're familiarizing yourself with this, and slowly you'll see, you'll have a better sense for this. Naturally, you'll intuitively know which foods are higher in glycemic index. But at first, you might have to do this by looking it up on a table or a chart, whenever it is that you want to go shopping. The numbers, just so you know, are ranked in this manner, where any number less than 55 is considered low. This is good. It's good to eat foods that fall into this category. These are medium GI foods, and these are high. None of these numbers make sense to you right now, but I'll show you some examples. But the other number that you want to be attentive to is glycemic load. And glycemic load is basically going to allow you to figure out how much of a particular food or types of foods you can eat per day to maintain yourself within the right range of sugars. So this number takes into account how much carbs you eat and what the glycemic index of those carbs are. And this is what tells you how much your sugar levels will change. The glycemic load is based on the concentration of it. I'll give you a key number to keep in mind. The glycemic load that you want per day is 100. So certain, as you see on the scale, every food, every table that you look at with GIs and GLs will have both of these on there, both based on the serving sizes, which is the GL, the glycemic load, and just the regular GI, how fast the sugar levels will spike as a result of eating a particular food. But perhaps the best way to decide on what you want to eat per day is to take a look at the glycemic load of everything it is that you plan on eating. Adding all of that up and figuring out whether or not you end up above or below 100. And again, remember, the glycemic load will depend on how much of it you eat. Because I can eat meat all day, which has a very low glycemic index. But if I eat a lot of it, it's still going to add up to be a high glycemic load. So here are a few examples, so that you can see the different types of food, that have low or high glycemic indices. So this is showing you the glycemic index on this side. This is the glycemic load on this side. I'm sorry if this is a little bit small, but I want to highlight, for instance, honey. Glycemic index is 87, which is actually pretty high, right? It's going to spike your sugar levels up fast, but the glycemic load is 3. So if you wanted to have 1 tablespoon of honey instead of 1 tablespoon of sugar, which is not on here.
Yes.
Table sugar. After Snickers bar.
After Snickers bar, perfect. So this is 2 tablespoons of sugar give you 2 teaspoons, of sugar give you a glycemic load of 7. So half of regular sugar. So you're still better off eating something that has a lower glycemic load as opposed to something like regular table sugar.
That's volume, though, we're looking at, because honey has a water component to it, so you're doing a tablespoon, so it looks like a lot, but if you were to dehydrate it, it's going to be probably less than 2 teaspoons of sugar. So that's not telling us if I'm going to get the same sweetness in my tea.
No.
2 teaspoons versus the 1 tablespoon.
No, it's not going to tell you about sweetness, but it's going to tell you the size, the amount of honey that you can eat to get a glycemic load of 3. Yeah. But at least, you know, as far as the numbers that you're looking at, you can kind of get a sense for which ones you should be eating throughout the day that add you up to be about 100. Having said that, this is why I think it's important to look at both GI and GL. Notice honey has a high glycemic index. Usually when foods have high glycemic indices, that's indicative of how quickly your, like we talked about earlier, how quickly your sugar levels will spike. If you want to reduce your cravings, it's best to stay within that medium to low range of glycemic index in general. Anytime that the glycemic index spikes to the high levels, you're talking about foods that are going to make you crave probably more of the same type, so more sugar. That's what you would eventually want. But then take a look at all the baked goods. All of these fall into the category of things that are super high in glycemic load. So 1 piece of cornbread is 1/3 of your day. Gone. 1/3 of your glycemic load for the day in 1 piece of cornbread. So when we realize that, it changes the way that we think about food. Glycemic index of 110. It's not even sugar, but it's so much carbs that the glycemic index is extremely high. And as you see, obviously, all the baked goods really are falling into that same category. They're all really high. Grape nuts, which I don't even know what those are. I don't know.
Cereal.
Oh, it's cereal. 31.
Crazy good fiber, though.
Yeah, sure, you can think of it that way. Fiber is a whole other discussion, yeah. So these are some examples of that. There's some more here, I think, in terms of really good ones that you can look at. Oatmeal, which falls into a medium glycemic index and a really good glycemic load. So oatmeal is a good choice. Beverages are always fascinating. 1 cup of, what is that, cranberry juice cocktail. 1 cup is 24 glycemic loads. So it's pretty insane, right? I'll let you think about this for a moment. But here is an important point to remember. Once you know the idea of glycemic load, and this is why, in my opinion, I think to go by insulin levels is the best way for a healthy lifestyle, is that technically you can eat everything. You just have to be aware of how much of it you're eating, right? Because if you're eating, this is kind of the same concept of calorie restriction, which is also one of the best ways of weight loss. Calorie restriction, not anorexia or bad eating habits, but restricting the foods, not necessarily cutting certain foods out entirely of our diets. But the idea of understanding that certain foods have higher glycemic loads allows you to say, okay, well today I do want to have this cranberry cocktail. I just realized that I eliminated 24 units of my glycemic load. So now I have to adjust. The rest of my day, I have to make sure I'm eating things that are lower in their glycemic load. Yeah.
So if you're let's say you have a calorie goal every day, and you just mentioned about calories in versus calories out. So like if you eat if you're supposed to eat 2,000 calories a day, and let's say you decide to eat all of that in pizza. Now that's technically 2,000 calories, right? So does your body see that as the same thing? Like if you can you technically lose weight?
It's a great question. What do you think based on what we just talked about?
I mean, I'm probably not. My instincts to say that, but I'm just wondering how does your body metabolize bad calories?
Yeah.
Versus
It's an excellent question, and this was an area where there was a lot of debate for a while because everyone, the idea is that calories are calories. They're a unit of energy. 1 calorie should equal 1 calorie, right? And it theoretically does. But you just learned the way that the body metabolizes that calorie is very different. So theoretically, 1 calorie is equal to 1 calorie, but because of the vicious cycle that a calorie from a pizza starts versus a calorie from a piece of meat will start, the way that they get processed is very different, and the ability to lose weight becomes very different because of it. So really 1 calorie is not 1 calorie. You can eat a 2,000 calorie diet that is strictly with pizza, and you probably will not lose weight the way that somebody else who has a 2,000 calorie diet and is on a high protein diet will lose weight. That's the distinction.
You should try it out.
Sorry, no. You can be our
There's a professor who did the Twinkie diet. He ate just Twinkies to prove to his class that you could lose weight eating really bad food. But the penalty for that is he probably was eating 300 to 700 calories less than he would be if he was eating more healthy foods that were lower glycemic index. He was very deeply calorie restricted.
Right.
But he did lose weight eating just Twinkies. You can look
It
it
wasn't
up.
healthier.
But it's exactly, and that's the other thing. That's the other thing that you gotta consider. Exactly. I should go back to when Ashley contacted me. The decision about the name of this talk was healthy ways to lose body fat, right? We're not talking about just getting rid of fat because we want to get that number to the percentage to drop. This is about how to lose fat in a healthy way that's sustainable. And the way to do it is predominantly through glycemic index.
So I read that for GI, it depends on the way you process the foods. For example, sweet potato, if you roast them versus you boil them, it creates different GI. But does that change the calorie or no?
No, the calories don't change that way, and the reason why, I'm not sure that it changes the GI actually, depending on how you process the carb. What it changes is the enzymes within that food. So for instance, certain foods, if you put them at high temperatures, they will denature or degrade all of their proteins, their key enzymes. And some of those enzymes are required for fiber processing. So when you process them in a particular way that causes them to lose those enzymes, now you're not getting the benefits, the fiber benefits of that food. It doesn't necessarily change the GI of it. What it will change is how you end up metabolizing that food so that you're gaining the benefit of the fiber as well. So it is important, and all of these things really do tie in together. Somebody else mentioned fibers earlier too, and you have to remember, we're talking about these topics in isolation, but in reality, everything does tie in together. And so at some point, you just need to have like a master map of how all this information connects to be able to determine what is the absolute best healthy way to maintain a diet. Some more examples, just very quickly. So potatoes, super high, 36.4, glycemic load 104. And my contention is that You do anything with potatoes, they taste good. I don't know what it is about potatoes, and this is probably because of this information here. Corn is very high.
Is it like canned corn?
61 for 1 cup. It can be either corn that you cut, but if it's 1 cup of corn, it's 61.
One of the cans, they probably add on.
Those are just cut out corn. Pure sugar is actually lower, like we saw in that first one. Pure sugar GI is about 70, GL is 7. Yeah, so it tastes like sorry, yes.
So, if potato has a glycemic load of 36.4, and if all you did was eat potatoes all day long, you would exceed your daily intake.
Yep.
And therefore would probably gain weight, right?
Yep.
Now,
Gain visceral fat.
in visceral fat, not overall body fat. Like meaning you could physically get smaller, but you would just
Exactly. You could still hold on to some of that fat inside around your internal organs. That's where that fat stays. Because it is possible that some people end up still looking somewhat slender, or they look like they're in proportion, everything looks okay, but it's not until you look inside at that, at the organs that you identify.
because I'm thinking of the guy who did the potato diet for a year. So like I'm just wondering that guy lost quite a bit of weight in that process.
Yep.
And so I'm
Again, not healthy. And I guarantee you, if that guy did an MRI, all along his organs, there would be fatty tissue. Guaranteed. And that's the best way to know, in reality, the best way to know how healthy you are is to get an MRI scan. That's, they put you in the MRI machine and you can see all the fat around your internal organs. But of course, no insurance company is ever going to approve an MRI scan for fat percentage. So the best we have right now, the closest in reality to MRI is the dunk tank. Something similar to the dunk tank, which gives you a very accurate plus or minus 3% error. Other than that, the rest are very iffy.
What's a dunk tank?
Dunk tank is it's basically a pool of water that they dunk you into, and it measures the displacement of water as you get immersed into it, and it tells you the based on the displacement of water, you can determine the ratio between your muscle versus fat. So it is the #1 most accurate way of measuring body fat percentage. Across all studies, the rate of error for dunk tank is plus or minus 3. Whereas almost all other forms of body fat percentage measurements are plus or minus 10.
better than the scan we're doing.
Yeah.
Better than the scan, I'm sorry to say. Yeah.
The scans that they were gonna start
So if you want to know the real number, it's the dunk.
How does it determine the difference between visceral versus target?
Because the way that they float in water is different. It even tells you visceral versus subcutaneous fat. Because I told you visceral is heavy and hard to move. So the way it displaces water is different from subcutaneous fat. Yeah, it's an awesome technique. It's kind of expensive. I think it's $75 to $100 depending on where you go per dunk. But it is an awesome way to get a very, very accurate measure of your fat before. It's a good time. You can still do it now. And it would be good to compare it to the scans that you have, just to see how different the numbers may be. Yeah. Oh, sorry, we'll go around.
Would any of these numbers change? Because aren't some vegetables, their composition is made different when they're mass produced or mass farmed versus if you grew stuff in your own backyard, or does that not really change?
Chances are it does to some extent, but I think the numbers are negligible. I don't know of any studies, at least, that have compared between, let's say, organic, naturally grown versus, these other types of vegetables that are mass produced. So I don't know. I don't know the answer. I would assume there might be some distinctions between the two, but again, I don't think that it would be a drastic difference.
Oh, I was gonna say I've done both the dunk tank and the DEXA scan, and I asked them about it. The DEXA scan, it's about a 6% difference in how they measure the body fat. So it was, when I got the result from the DEXA scan, I was like, whoa, that's way higher than I thought. But then they said, no, that's actually equivalent to what you got dunked in. So if you do get the dunk, it's gonna be significantly lower, but don't think, oh, I lost all this body fat since I did my scan. There's a percentage.
There is a
error.
percentage of error. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. The percentage of error for the scans are somewhere around 5 to 6%,
Yeah.
whereas for the dunk, it's plus or minus 2 to 3%.
Right, and you
So,
can see it.
yeah.
Because we've all done the scan, so I'm just thinking if someone goes to try to do the dunk tank, they're gonna have to ask them about it.
Yep. Somebody else, yeah.
Is it the same thing if you were to have, like, if you're pregnant, does the visceral fat still have to be maintained where it's, because you're holding another person, like, in your body, like, does it have to be more, or does it have to still be sustained where it's the balance is preserved?
You never need visceral fat.
Okay.
Even during pregnancy, you're not gaining visceral fat. In fact, you should be gaining very little subcutaneous fat, even during pregnancy, because the child that you're carrying is getting fed from the placenta and all the other nutrients that are around it, and that's why the belly gets big. It's because of the child and the placenta. It's not the fat, right? So visceral fat is bad always, no matter what, and it's never necessary, ever.
So this is more about visceral fat. Are there different methods to lose subcutaneous fat?
Subcutaneous fat is not, I don't know that there is a way to lose it based on this particular method. I mean, you can go into, again, a more strict diet to lose the subcutaneous fat, and that will get you perhaps to seeing, I don't know, if you're looking for a six-pack, for instance, you might be able to see that. But this method will work in fats in general, in the loss of fats. The first group of fats to go will be your subcutaneous fat. So when you begin to pay attention to your glycemic load, first you get rid of subcutaneous fat, then it needs to attack all of that visceral fat. Okay. Last one that I think is the last one, just a few more, and I'll just skip through these because you guys will have this resource, by the way. I sent a paper to Ashley to send out to all of you. And just the last slide, and I think it's second to last maybe, or no, it is the last slide, in terms of nuts and meats and proteins. So, and it's interesting that some dairy products, as you can see, like low-fat ice cream, can actually be decent in comparison to what we may have thought. Not necessarily Haagen-Dazs, but this is, I think, fascinating. Zero. Yeah. Beef, chicken, egg, yep, all of these are zero. So this is why high protein diets are so popular, because you can eat a lot of it, right, and yet maintain low glycemic load. This is when the concept of calories then comes in, because you're technically not eating a whole lot of glycemic, you're not eating any glycemic load. I can eat a diet full on beef and chicken all day long, and my glycemic load will still be zero. But the calories I'm taking in are still very high. So this is where you still need to take calories into consideration, right? So it is, again, all of these need to be thought about simultaneously. But good to know at least that meats are kind of a free-for-all.
You didn't list fats.
What fats?
Olive oil, butter.
Though not everything is on here. You can see all of those on the chart that I've sent out to Ashley. The list is long, but they fall, olive oils and things like that fall somewhere close to these nuts. Yeah, very close. Okay, so that's all in terms of eating habits. So that's one way to regulate insulin levels. But the second way is mindfulness and not stressing. And I know I've already talked to you guys about mindfulness in the past, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But just want to remind you that mindfulness studies have shown that people who practice mindfulness have a reduced susceptibility to food cravings. And there's a significant correlation between the amount of insulin that gets secreted, the amount of cortisol, which is the hormone that gets secreted when we're stressed out, and insulin levels. So the higher your cortisol levels, the higher your insulin levels. And so the more you can regulate your stress levels and stay more mindful throughout the day in general, the less food cravings you're likely to have, which is a strange connection, but a true one nonetheless. How do we practice mindfulness? This is review. For those of you who were here before, how can you do mindfulness? What's that?
Grateful exercise.
Grateful exercise, very good. Reminding yourself of 3 blessings every morning. What else?
Narrating in the car.
Narrating in the car, I like that. Very cool, you remember that one. Yeah, just being aware of your surroundings, narrating where you're going, what you're doing to yourself. What else? Or anything else that other people have used?
Breathing.
What's that? Breathing, perfect.
Keeping, was it
Journal?
keeping a diary or something?
Very good, keeping a journal. Excellent.
5-minute journal.
What's that?
Have you heard of the 5-minute journal?
The 5-minute journal, yep. There's a book, 5-minute journal, every morning. In 5 minutes, you can do a practice of mindfulness. And a lot of apps. There are many apps that you can use daily for mindfulness. But there are a lot of different ways, like we said, keeping a journal, recalling blessings, guided meditations, which are in a lot of apps, breath, and taking classes, mindfulness classes, and doing yoga. Yoga is also very helpful in terms of creating mindfulness. And the last obvious one is moving. And I think this goes without saying. The more active we are, the more active we are, the more all of those other components get affected. The less stressed out we are, the less cortisol levels, the lower the insulin levels. So in general, moving is very important. And I have heard that you guys actually, after the last talk that we had here, you brought apparently a HIIT exercise here. Is that true? Are you doing, or is coming? Awesome. So that is obviously one of the best ways to exercise, but when I say move, I mean just move. Like, I'm not even talking about exercise, I'm saying just be active. And it's fascinating that today, at least in the US, one of the biggest epidemics that we're facing is simply lack of movement. Like, people just walking, that's it. I go to the gym sometimes and see people circling around the parking lot 5 times to find the closest spot to the entry of the gym. Are you kidding? You're going to the gym to exercise, but you don't want to walk an extra 10 steps to get to the inside of the gym. So whenever necessary, whenever possible, it's a good idea to force ourselves almost to walk. There's an elevator at UCLA. This is one of my favorite things that one day I'm going to take a picture of. There's an elevator at UCLA on like the 6th floor of a parking lot that says free exercise, take the stairs. On the elevator, it's huge. And as you're standing there, first of all, I have never seen someone standing at that elevator. Because I think if you were standing looking at these doors that tell you there are stairs right there and you can exercise with them, it almost gives you a guilt conscience to take the elevator. But I think it's such a great way to just move, to learn to constantly find ways to avoid being more comfortable. So if I can take the stairs, why not? If I can walk an extra 5 steps, why not? I have a personal rule of less than 5 flights of stairs, I don't take the elevator unless there are no stairs. Even in high heels, I take the stairs. So it's a good idea to try and find ways to force yourself to move more.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I know if you don't move at all, that's not good for your body. Like, you know,
you got that right.
Like your joints break down and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's also like for people who like work out a lot. And there's also the flip side of that. Like, so is there That's right, yes. If you don't exercise at all, it's like your body breaks down. It seems like if you exercise a lot, it seems like you're putting more mileage on your joints and things like that. So it's like, what's the like?
There's a balancing.
Well, I know in between, obviously, but like if you go to the gym a lot, is that like that?
I think it all depends on the types of exercises you do. I don't know that there's a black and white answer to the question. And it also depends on the body types. It depends on your age. Like if I'm 50 years old and I'm going to the gym and lifting, 60-pound weights, probably not a good idea for my joints. But if I'm younger and lifting heavy weights, maybe it's okay. But then again, you could argue that lifting heavy weights could eventually cause further breakdown of the joints. So it really depends, and I think you sort of have to figure out where that balancing line is for you. But the healthiest recommendations, at least, that have been made by the National Institute of Health is that every adult should be getting at least 30 minutes of exercise per day. So even the idea that we're saying, you should take a rest day, for instance, exercising, as long as it's moderate, as long as you're not killing yourself doing it, you can do on a daily basis and still be okay.
And is the definition of exercise for that 30 minutes, is that like a heart rate level? Or?
It is, yeah. So getting your heart rate past your resting metabolic rate. It doesn't need to go super high. It just needs to go above your resting. Did anyone measure the resting heart rate, by the way, after in the morning when you woke up? Yeah, and was it different from when you were in here? Okay, it was more chill. It was more chill, yeah. So that's how it should have been. Any other questions? Excellent. Well, that brings me to the end, and I hope that you can all learn to regulate your insulin level.